Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today and welcoming poet and scholar Dr. Haki Madhubuti to Washington State University. My name is Thabiti Lewis. I'm a professor of English at Washington State University, Vancouver's campus. In the chat, we would like you to tell us your name and where you're tuning in from, and feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat throughout the talk. We'll convey your questions to the author during the Q&A. We always try to offer land acknowledgements. So I'm coming to you from Washington State University, located in the homelands of the Chinookan and Tayetnapam peoples and the Cowlitz tribe, Indian tribe. Thank you to the WSU Vancouver and our sponsors, including ASWSU, Academic Innovation and Outreach, Rob Baker and Brian Varner, interns Adam Sendak, Imola Morales, and Megan McCormick and the Common Reading Program, especially Karen Weatherman. Dr. Madhubuti's talk this evening has significant connections to our Common Reading book this year, Tales of Two Americas, Stories of Inequality in a Divided Nation. To those of you who are here for a Common Reading credit, the link will be pasted during the talk, during the chat, pasted in the chat during the Q&A. So Haki, this is an immense honor for me. And this is the first time I've had the opportunity to introduce you. So, I began by, as I was thinking about this, this introduction of you, or this portion of it, I was thinking, how does one come to be influenced by ideas? And how often does one get to meet, get to know, and learn from the bearer of powerful cultural fruit on more than casual terms? My generation of the mid 1980s and early 90s cut our intellectual teeth on and were inspired by the Black Power and Black Arts moment. Growing up in St. Louis, my aunts and uncles helped run the Panther-sponsored breakfast programs. And as a kid, we enjoyed the sounds of the bag groups on Hippie Hill in Forest Park, Sundays in the summer. And as a college student at the University of Rochester trying to find my way, I recall taking an African-American literature course and was struck by the words and ideas of the Black arts writers. Baraka's Dutchman, his poem Black Art, along with poems of Nikki Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez, they were riveting. Then we read poems from a poet named Donnell Lee, but he was cool. And we also read a poem to complement other poems. And I knew at that moment that majoring in English was what I wanted to do. So that was the first unofficial introduction. And as I was reading those poems, the play with syntax, sound, pace, language, image made me know this was something I could do. I was floored by the lines, and he was cool, like his tikis were hand carved out of ivory and came express from the motherland. He would greet you in Swahili and say goodbye in Yoruba. Woo, Jim, he'd be so cool and intelligent. The dude, the writer of the poem, was cool and funny. And over the years, I learned that he was just that, a person with biting wit, always quick to slip one or two funny lines in at just the right moment, despite his quiet demeanor. So a year after this encounter, we invited this same poet, who I then learned was Haki Madhubuti, to our campus in 1988 to speak. And it was the beginning of a long relationship. We had dinner with him. He explained that he was a vegetarian, why, and the work he was doing in Chicago, running Third World Press, 2 schools, the Institute of Positive Education, several bookstores, and that he was a founding member of the Obasi Writers Group. I was familiar with his early works like Think Black, Don't Cry, Scream, and We Walk the Near the New Way of the New World, and Plan to Planet. These books and essays and poems were life-changing, especially his landmark work of 1990, Black Men, Obsolete, Single, and Dangerous. That summer I spent at 75th and Cottage Grove led to a return for what I would call my pre-PhD education, working at Third World Press in 1991. There I learned about the Black arts in Chicago and Haki's enormous role in connection to a long list of mentors, such as Ms. Brooks, Hoyt Fuller, Margaret Burroughs, and so many others, and that he, along with Ms. Brooks, read poems inaugurating the Wall of Respect. Haki is an institution builder. And Haki, we are pleased to have you here with us at WSU, as you're on the cusp of 80 and still producing like you're 30 or 40 years old, writing poems, poetry, essays, and building institutions and producing the ideas that change lives. Your creative and activist work during the Black arts movement continues today as your intellect and artistry continue to drive Black arts forward in Chicago and across the nation. Your art and ideas have impacted the hearts and minds of so many, including this person who's talking to you today. So as you read tonight, old and new poems, we embrace the opportunity to share with others, or I'm embracing this opportunity to share with others what I have had the pleasure of knowing for the past 35 years, which is that the aesthetic and moral, pedagogical, and truth-seeking aesthetics of your craft will compel listeners to cry, scream, laugh, and maybe, just maybe, change their minds. And so with that, I want to pass off the finale of this introduction to Emma Morales, the VWS intern, to finish the introduction of Dr. Madhubuti. Emma.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Lewis, for getting us started with a great introduction. My name is Emma Morales, and I'm an intern for the Washington State University Visiting Writers Series and an English teaching graduate. Before I get started, our next event will be a reading with Brian Blanchfield on Tuesday, October 19th at 5:30 p.m. in person at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, which will be free and open to the public. Masks will be required for in-person attendees, and we will also be broadcasting the event on YouTube Live. Mark your calendars, and we hope to see you there. Our star for the event today is Dr. Haki R. Madhubuti, award-winning poet and civil rights activist. Madhubuti is an architect of the Chicago Black Arts Movement and founder and publisher of Third World Press. He is author and editor of 36 books of poetry and nonfiction, including Don't Cry, Scream, Run Toward Fear, New Poems, and A Poet's Handbook, and the best-selling Black Men, Obsolete, Single, Dangerous, ? A longtime community activist and institution builder, Madhubuti has been at the forefront of numerous schools of literary arts and civil rights organizations in his long, distinguished career as a writer, teacher, and political activist. His teaching career includes Cornell University, Howard University, and Chicago State University, where he was appointed its first university distinguished professor, and he is founder of DePaul University's MFA program in creative writing. Madhubuti is also co-founder of the quarterly Black Books Bulletin, the Institute of Positive Education and its 3 schools in Chicago, the International Literary Hall of Fame for Writers of African Descent, and the National Black Writers Retreat. Some of Madhubuti's most recent books are Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, and Taught by Women, Poems as Resistance Language, New and Selected. And he is co-editor of Not Our President, New Directions from the Pushed Out, the Others, and the Clear Majority in Trump's Stolen America. Madhubuti's work has won many top literary honors, including the American Book Award, the Kumba Workshop Black Liberation Award, 2 fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, and 1 from the National Endowment for the Humanities. We are so fortunate to have this venerable writer and activist here with us today, so please put your virtual hands together as I introduce the remarkable Dr. Haki R. Madhubuti.
It's quite an evening. Again, I want to thank both Dr. Lewis and Emma for the kind introduction and words. The only correction I would make, Emma, is that I was the last Ida B. Wells Barnett University professor, distinguished university professor at DePaul. I was not involved in the MFA program at all. I co-founded the MFA program at Chicago State University. Okay, so I'm really happy to be here this evening, and I take this reading and this talk with you all very seriously. I feel that young people represent our tomorrow. Having taught for over 42 years, I think that your job today, your meaning in this world cannot be more important. And so my reading this evening and my talk with you this evening will be around poems I think help to bring some understanding of who we are. And I'm going to start with a poem that basically is titled Poetry. Poetry will not stop or delay wars, will not erase rape from the landscape, will not cease murder or eliminate poverty, hunger, or excruciating fear. Poems do not command armies, run school systems, or manage money. Poetry is not intimately involved in the education of psychologists, physicians, or smiling politicians. In this universe, the magic, the beauty, the willful art of explaining the world in you, the timeless, the unread, the unstoppable fixation with language and ideas, the visionary, the satisfiable equalizer screaming for the vitality of dreams, interrupting false calm, demanding fairness in a new world, are the poets and their poems. Poetry is the wellspring of tradition, the bleeding connector to yesterdays and the free passport to futures. Poems bind people to language, link generations to each other, and introduce cultures to cultures. Poetry, if given the eye and ear, can bring memories, issue in laughter, rein in beauty, and cure ignorance. Language in the context of the working poem can raise the mindset of an entire civilization, speak to 2-year-olds, and render some of us more wise. To be touched by living poetry can only make us better people. The determined force in any age is the poem, old as ideas and as life-giving as active lovers. A part of any answer is in the rhythm of the people. Their heartbeat comes urgently in two universal forms, music and poetry. For the reader, for the quiet seeker, for the many seeking and willing to sacrifice one syllable mumblings and easy conclusions. Poetry can be that gigantic river that allows one to recognize in the circle of fire, the center of life. Poetry defined my life. I'm here tonight as a result of poetry, as a result of language, as a result of listening to and reading Gwendolyn Brooks, Langston Hughes, Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright. I can go on and on. But what these poets gave to me, what these writers gave to me, these fiction writers gave to me, is a deep, deep respect for the truth. And I'll read this poem to you. It's called Too Late, the Truth. Who quieted the fourth estate, took words, images, and liberating ideas from the recently blind and stole the nation? Why was there not a storm among us confronting the wealth of ignorance? What is the price of deceptive and enriched silence? Who compromised the music of truth, the poetry of deep thought? What of the carpentry of inner peace and community? The people are not derivatives. No little of hedge funds, credit default swaps, or greed passing as compassionate investing. It is the cowards of all professions who sell their children's and elders' future for the fairy tale of quick unearned money. We have witnessed superior failure, 8 years of the lowest mediocre denominator, passing as expertise, proven again, is much easier to believe than think. And for me, this music around poetry and what it gave to me, and I coming up during the 60s, and most certainly involved in the whole creation of the Black Arts Movement and Third World Press and other institutions. Here in Chicago, we have the Institute of Positive Education, and we operate 3 schools. We have a preschool and 2 K-8s, the Barbara Sizemore Academy and the Betty Shabazz Academy. And we service over 600 children a day in what we call an African-centered education. And so our children grow up studying and learning about their ancestors, as well as understanding where we are and how we got here. Dr. Lewis mentioned a poem earlier that influenced him, and I decided to read it tonight. So I'm gonna read 2 poems, at least 2 poems from the 60s. And this poem is, But He Was Cool, or He Even Stopped for Green Lights. Super cool. Ultra Black Italian Purple had a beautiful shade. He had a double natural that put the sisters to shame. His dashikis were tailor-made, and his beads were imported seashells from some black country I never heard of. He was triple hip. His tikis were hand carved out of ivory and came express from the motherland. He would greet you in Swahili and say goodbye in Yoruba. Ooh, Jim, he be so cool and ill-intelligent. And cool, so cool, he was uncool, but other Negroes cool. Cool, ultra cool was bop cool, ice pop cool, so cool, his wine to be cool, he was air conditioned cool. Cool, real cool, made me cool, not that cool. Cool, so cool, hip nickname, refrigerator. Cool, so cool, he didn't know after Detroit, Newark, Chicago, etc. We had hip cool, super cool, real cool, that to be black is to be very hot. And of course, one of the defining moments or decades in my life was the Vietnam War. And many of the poets from all traditions and all cultures, we wrote poetry about the war. And this is my poem. It's called Communication in White. Dee wee dee nick nick click rip bomb deaf to cleat deaf to cleat deaf to all the Paris Peace Talks 1968. And during that very difficult time was the assassination of the Prince of Peace, Dr. Martin Luther King. And this poem was written upon his assassination. And the title of the poem is Assassination. It was wild. The bullet hit high, the throat neck, and from everywhere, the motel, from under bushes and cars, from around corners and across streets, out of the garbage cans and from rat holes in the earth, they came running. With guns drawn, they came running toward the king. All of them, fast and sure. As if the king was going to fire back. They came running, fast and sure, in the wrong direction. And so for us, those of us involved in struggle, we had a deep connection. We're trying to form a deep connection with Africa. And most certainly, we define our existence as men and women from Africa. That's our homeland. And we were essentially raped from Africa in the millions and sprinkled around the Western world to build the world for somebody else. And so in my own minor way, I tried to give Africa some advice, having been raised and born and raised here in America. And I write in a poem that's titled, Change is Not Always Progress, for African Africans. Africa, don't let them steal your face or take your circles and make them squares. Don't let them steal your body and to put 100 stories of concrete on you so that you arrogantly scrape the sky. I've been writing for over 60 years and have been involved in building institutional structures which are freestanding, such as Third World Press and the Institute of Public Education in our schools, but so also at universities, most certainly Chicago State University, where I helped co-found the MFA program, and I founded the Gwendolyn Brooks Center for Creative Writing and Black Literature. And for over 20 years while I was there, we had major writers' conferences, Black writers' conferences. And one of the men who inspired me was a writer, fiction writer, by the name of John Oliver Killens. And look his work up, John Oliver Killens. In fact, they just published a new book of his with an introduction by Ishmael Reed. Positive movement will be difficult, but necessary. Remember past ugly to memories of the once, to memories of the used to be, lost days of glory, the forgotten, forgiven history of the race. When sun mattered and the night was for sleeping and not for planning the death of enemies. Beautiful, real pretty like morning vegetation, beautiful like African women bathing in Tanzanian sun. Beautiful, a word now used exclusively to describe the ungettable. A word used to describe roaches disguised as people that viciously misuse the world. Time is hard, Rufus. They're gonna be harder. Come on, champ, chop, chop, chop. Hit hard, hit harder, catch up, chop, chop. Sleep less, eat right, rise earlier. Whip dust into the eyes of excuse makers. Talk to your children about meaning. Talk to your children about working for their people. Chop, chop, hit hard, hit harder. Beat it, beat it, beat it, beat it now in this world. We face our comings as hip slaves, unknown to ourselves, unknown to the actual challenges of the race. Do you know your real name? Do you know the real reasons you are here? Check the smiles on your enemies' faces if you can identify your enemies. They crawl from the earth in many faces: Negroes, militants, revolutionary integrationists, soul brother number 15, Black capitalists, colored politicians, and pig eaters lying about their diet. Listen now, listen. Open your ears. We got a number for you. Listen, somebody's trying to tell us something. Listen, somebody's trying to pull our minds. It ain't magic, we better if it will. Listen, let the words seek greater levels of meaning. Split in there. Words be. Beat it, words, beat it now. It ain't gypsy tales or trails or false eyes fronting for the devil. It ain't about the happy ending of the West unless you reading the future wrong. And, you know, I've always told my students that, you know, you're nothing as long as nothing is on your mind. And it's important that we understand that all of us, whatever culture you're part of, that your name means something. My name was changed from Donnell Lee back in the 70s to Haki Madhubuti. Haki Madhubuti comes from the Kiswahili language that's spoken in Tanzania and East Africa. And Haki means just or justice, and Madhubuti means precise, accurate, dependable. I had the pleasure of having lunch with the Honorable Julius Nyerere, who was the president of Tanzania when I visited there back in the 70s. And he had asked me about my name. So I wrote this short piece. Your name tells us who you are, where you come from, where you're going, how you may get there, and who's going with you. Your name is legitimization of the past, confirmation of the present, and direction for the future. And so as we move toward, you know, the later works, Dr. Lewis talked about a book of mine that influenced him, was titled Black Men, Obsolete, Single, Dangerous. And I opened that book with a poem, even though the book is a book of essays dealing with Black men in the world, and most certainly in this country. And I'm going to read that poem. It's called The B Network. Brothers bopping, bebopping, cities locked up and chained insane by crack and other acts of desperation, computerizing, Pentagon selling, producing, bopping brothers both on being better, best, and beautiful. If the bopping brothers are beautiful, where are the sisters who seek brother man with a drugless head, unbossed or beaten by the bodacious West? In a time of big wind being blown by brothers, will other brothers beat back backwardness to better and best without braggart bosses beating butts, taking names and digging graves? Beating badness into bad may be urban, but is it beautiful and serious? Or is a betrayal and an air of prepared easy death hanging on corners, trapping young brothers before they know the difference between big death and big life? Brothers bopping, bebopping, cities locked up and chained insane by crack and other acts of desperation, computerizing, Pentagon selling, producing, bopping brothers both of being better, best, beautiful, and definitely not Black. The critical best is that brothers better be the best if they'd avoid backwardness. Brothers better be the best if they're to conquer beautiful bigness and comprehend that bad is only bad if it's big, Black, and better than boastful braggarts belittling our best and brightest with bosses seeking inches when miles are better. Brothers need to bop to being black and bright and above board, the black train of beautiful wisdom that is bending this bind toward a new and knowledgeable beginning that is bountiful and beautiful. While bebopping to be better than the test, brother man, better yet, write the exam. So I'm a cultural poet, I'm a political poet. And all of my life, I've written cultural, political poems. And I read Richard Wright's Black Boy at 13, 14 years old, and it changed my life. Because for the first time in my life, I was reading literature that was not an insult to my own personhood. Because I hated myself. I grew up hating myself in America. That's what America taught me. And so when my mother asked me to go to the Detroit Library to check out Black Boy, I refused. I refused because of this self-hatred that had been taught all my life by white America. I didn't want to go to a white library and check out a book written by a black man titled Black Boy, who was critical of white America, because I hated myself. But she insisted. And my mother was not an educated woman in the sense of formal education. She only received a 9th grade education. And my mother, a very beautiful woman, basically was in the sex trade. That's how she took care of me and my sister. But I went to the library, found a book on the shelf, put it to my chest, walked to an unpeopled section of the library, sat down and began to read. And for the first time in my life, in my young life, I was reading literature that was not an insult to my own personhood. I was reading language, these words and sentences and paragraphs about me, and essentially ideas about me, about us as people of African ancestry here in America. Everything that Wright wrote in Black Boy, every page just slapped me in the face, said, wake up, Negro, wake up. I read over half the book that day in the Detroit Public Library, checked the book out, took it home and finished it in less than 24 hours. Gave the book to my mother, went back to the library and checked out everything Richard Wright had published. And one of the most important books that very few people have read is White Man Listen, which is a book of essays. And in White Man Listen, there's a very important essay on Negro writing. We were Negroes at that time. And as I read this book, I just would jot down all these Black authors, from Claude McKay to Richard Wright to, Langston Hughes to Gwendolyn Brooks to Jane Toomer to all these writers. And I began to, as a young boy, as a young teenager, began to systematically read these writers. And as I would read them, I would write my own summary of the book. And then that started my writing career as a poet, which brings us to today, where we are today. My latest book is taught by women. And I write about women because women influence my life. I would not be here without Gwendolyn Brooks. I would not be here this evening sharing these poems with you without Margaret G. Burroughs, the founder of the DuSable Museum of African American History. Of course, Gwendolyn Brooks was the first Black to win the Pulitzer Prize. I would not be here without Barbara Ann Sizemore, who was the first Black woman superintendent of the Washington, D.C. school system. Okay, I would not be here without her. I would not be here without my wife, Dr. Carol D. Lee. Look her up, Dr. Carol D. Lee. Within 2 weeks, she would become the current president of the National Academy of Education. My wife is bad. She's brilliant. She's brilliant. I mean, that's why she married me, but I understand. But she's part of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She's a part of, I mean, she's just a top of her game. But I wouldn't be here without Shirley Graham Du Bois, who had made a career on her own before she married W.B. Du Bois. Ida B. Wells, I wouldn't be here. So on this book, I got all these sisters names, Black women, white women. I got Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Margaret Atwood, okay, as part of the women who informed me and allowed me to grow. But also, I got Grace Lee Boggs, okay? Margaret Walker Alexander, Lucille Clifton, Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Anita Hill, Betty Carter, she could sing her, Gail Jones, and so forth. Betty Shabazz, Sonia Sanchez, my dear friend Sonia Sanchez, Beverly Gottschalk, and so forth. So I'm gonna read from Taught by Women. And to be yet to let me know when I have to stop because I don't have a clock here in front of me. The first poem is I'm going to read is Liberation Narratives. And this poem is in about seven stanzas. 1. It may be a man's world, yet it's women who write music that navigate the harmony that grows children, drives learning, prepare knives for the cutting of green beans and lies while dodging genocide and rape. As men who run the world, bathed in the power of extreme illusion, overuse collateral damage and deficit language to justify it's a man's world. 2. Best advice to men, marry women smarter than you. Occasionally let them know it. 3. My mother was prettier than imagination soaked in honey, flavored with hot water and lemon. Her heart was there too. She was a short poem. Dead at 34, bare without flowers, notation, or truthful stories. She challenged men walking on her life like she was a used thread mill, years before they were invented. I have her eyes. I see damage everywhere. I become a stop sign. 4, Janet liked girls and told them so. Robert liked boys and kept it a secret. Both grew into teenagers, still liking girls, still liking boys. Each kept their desires to themselves. In the 21st century, part of the world began to mature and finally understood why Janet loved women and Robert loved men. They were born that way. Enough said. 5, if poetry is to have meaning, it must mean something. More than metaphor and simile, more than tree talk and looking for gigs, more than competition in unrhymed free verse, serious to the bone of incomprehension, surely to land the poet a Guggenheim or MacArthur Genius Grant. Artists should not expect from readers, listeners, and observers fairness, objectivity, or deep knowledge of wordplay, art, interpretive ideas of paint, or jumping notes. Often a smile will do. And yes, to buy and share books, visuals, music will help. Saying yes to children may get you into heaven. Saying no to war builds character and conscience. Giving 10% of what you earn to the homeless will aid in your sleeping a full night. Hopefully, to awake, creating healthier poems, prose, pictures, and critical perceptions of the potential of the letter P beyond politics, potholes, profiteers, poverty, pimp juice, patriots, Protestants, and playboys of the Western world. 6, if you don't know who you are, anybody can name you. 7, if the world loses elephants, dolphins, polar bears, frogs, trees, the ability of the majority to do good, if the world loses clean water, prayer, and meditation in all languages, love across borders, honest vegans and vegetarians, a mother's love, a father's caring, children dancing to knowledge and colors, artists not blind for money, privilege, or fame. If the world loses books, newspapers, clear thinkers, practical doers, poets, promising futures for the great majority, rainforests, a world vocabulary that accents yes and possibilities rather than knowing you can't do that. If the world loses the great apes, schools, giraffes, salmon, the coral reef, insects, worms, organic farmers, compost, green tea, workers who use their hands to build and repair stuff, North and South Pole, teachers, people of faith, engineers, wheatgrass, carrot juice, oatmeal, and 7-grain bread. If the world loses you and water, yes, precious you and the daily taste of life, it finally means that we lost butterflies yesterday and failed our children. And children are critical. And one of the reasons my wife and I and others founded these schools in Chicago is because we feel that it's our responsibility, those of us who have some knowledge about what's happening in the world. And we know what's happening in the world, not because we are university professors, we both retired now, and because we read. I'm in my library now, we read. It's because we travel. And in traveling, we travel outside of our comfort zone into other communities and cultures that are not ours. And we listen, and we listen, and we listen. And we realize that this world is so small and it is not our world. It's our world. Okay. It's not my world, it's our world. You see. And so it's very important for us to travel outside of your comfort zone and to listen to people who are not of your culture in many cases. There's a man in your area who lives in Portland that I listen to as much as I can, but I have read all of his book. His name is Tom Hartman. Tom Hartman is brilliant, and he doesn't have a university education, but he's brilliant. And he's written these hidden series books, these hidden history books. And his latest book is on the inability of this country to have a healthcare system that it benefits all. But these hidden book series are critical, Tom Hartman. And then there's another woman who, and Tom Hartman has a Tom Hartman program on Sirius radio, and Amy Goodman, The Democracy Now! These are just two people who outside of my culture I've listened to and I've learned from. I can name others, but they're in our time now. But the person who's influenced me the most was Gwendolyn Brooks. First Black to win the Pulitzer Prize. A serious poet who very few people can touch in terms of her ability to write and to influence others. I met her in 1967. And I just published my first book, which was Think Black. And I remember going to a church where she was basically teaching Blackstone Rangers how to write. And so after she finished doing that work, I walked up to her along with some other writers who had left and gave her a copy of my first book, Think Black, which had been published in 1967. And on Think Black, just the title itself, Think Black in 1967, all right? Nobody's talking about thinking black. And then I got the continent of Africa in the center. And then my name was Donnell Lee at that time. She took the book, this wonderful poet took the book, she put it to her heart and said, young man, I'm gonna read this tonight. And that started basically a 33-year familyhood where she became my cultural mother. And so this is one of the final poems I wrote for Gwen on her centennial. Gwendolyn Brooks, America in the wintertime. In this moment of orangutans, wolves, and scavengers, in high heat redesigning the North and South poles, and the wanderings of new tribes in limousines, with the confirmation of liars, thieves, and get-over artists, in the wilderness of Pennsylvania Avenue, Standing Rock, misspelled executive orders on yellow paper with crooked signatures. Where are the kind language makers among us? At a time of extreme climate damage, deciphering fake news, alternative truths, and me-ism, you saw the 21st century and left us. Not on your own accord, our permission. You have fought most of the 20th century, creating an army of poets and learned and loved language and stories of complicated rivers, seas, and oceans. Where is the kind green nourishment of kale and wheatgrass? You thought, wrote, and lived poetry. Knew that terror is also language-based on denial, first-ism, and rich cowards. You were honey and yes to us. Never ran from black as in bones, Africa, blood, and questioning yesterdays and tomorrows. We never saw you dance, but you had rhythm. You are a warrior before the war, creating earth language, uncommon signs and melodies, and did not sing the songs of career slaves. Keenly aware of Tubman, Douglas, Wells Barnett, Du Bois, and the oversized consciousness and commitment of never quit people, religiously taking notes of the bloodlust enemies of kindness. We heard your last words. America, if you see me as your enemy, you have no friends. That was from my mother, Gwendolyn Brooks. And so I had mentioned earlier that books play a very important part of my life, and most certainly I would hope in your lives too. We need to get off these screens, get off these phones, and continue to read. The best way to defeat ugly is to read books. This poem is titled Books as Answer, for a librarian friend of mine, Woodland Fox. There was only one book in our home. It was briefly read on Sundays, and in between the lies and promises of smiling men who slept with their palms out and pants unzipped. It was known by us children as the Sunday book. Rain and books, and sun and books to read, in a home where books were as strange as money and foreign policy discussions. And I alone searched for meaning where rocks and bells and human storms disguise themselves as answers, reference, and revelation. And I, a young map of what is missing and wrong, in a home empty of books, void of liberating words dancing as poetry and song, vacuous of language that reveals pictures of one's own fields, spirits, cities, and defining ideas. And I, without the quiet meditation that meditative prose demands, was left free to drink from the garbage cans of riotous imaginations, was sucked into the poverty of cultural destruction and violent answers, until someone, a stranger, a dark-skinned woman with natural hair in a storefront library, laid a book in front of me, and the language looked like me, walked like me, talked to me, and pulled me into its rhythms and stares, slapped me warmly into its consciousness, and read Rain and books, and sun and books, were each other's words and winds, were each other's breath and smiles, were each other's memories and mores. We build our stories page by page, chapter by chapter, poem by poem, play by play, to create a life, family, culture, and civilization, where it would take more than 60 seconds to tell strangers who you really are, to tell enemies and lovers your name. So again, young people, this is your world. You're coming into it. And you have to understand that you've got to be able to look each other in the eye and tell each other the truth. And the truth hurts often, but also the truth is liberating, you see. And for me, coming as a young man in a single parent home with a sister who had no chance. My sister had her first child at 14, second child at 16, third child at 18. By the time she was 27, she had 6 children, 5 different fathers. And she knows I tell the story because I got permission from her to tell the story. And for me, I ended up in the military at 18 years old, which is the poor boy's answer to unemployment. And so my mother, and you can't see her picture here too clearly, but she was a very beautiful woman. And this poem I'm going to share with you was written for my mother. My mother, it's called Maxine. My mother was the color of papaya and bananas. Her smile could weaken the strongest of men. She was uncommonly beautiful. Her face and body forced men to forget so-called social etiquette. They all, upon seeing her, would dream for a moment. Many men, married, single, and committed, old, young, saints, sinners, and in between, wanted a chance with Helen Maxine Graves. Most men were willing to risk everything to taste the flesh of a 14-year-old girl in a woman's body who had no idea that her beauty would define her life and that of her children. Jimmy Lee got the first hit with her smile, music, lies, sexual know-how, and promises. She ceased looking at other boys or men. That was her first mistake. Helen Maxine. My mother was so beautiful that she not only stopped cars, she stopped buses. Her beauty, if just for a moment, make most men's eyes roam and forget other women. She was music unemployed. She wrapped her body in clothes and refused to hide the nature of her desires. She wanted to be a dancer. She wanted to be warm weather year round. She wanted to know the origins of walnuts and wealth. She wanted to play the harmonica and sing like Billie Holiday. She believed in God, kind Negroes, reciprocity, and Southern food. Her clothes got in the way of men taking them off. I'm going to end up with just a few other poems. How did this 79-year-old poet get to Washington State this evening? As mentioned earlier by Dr. Lewis and others, my name used to be Don L. Lee, and the L stands for Luther. And I'll read this poem and I'll end up with one other poem. He was strange weather, this Luther. He read books, mainly poetry, and sometimes long books about people in foreign places. For a young man, he was too serious. He never did smile, and the family still don't know if he had good teeth. He liked music too. Even tried to play the trumpet until they heard the young Miles Davis. He then said he tried writing. The family didn't believe him because there ain't been no writers in this family. And everybody knows that whatever you end up doing, it got to be in your blood. It's like loving women. It's in the blood, arteries, and the brains. This family don't even write letters. They call everybody. That's why the phone's off 6 months out of the year. Then again, his brother Willie T used to write long, long letters from prison about the books he was reading by Malcolm and Frantz Fanon and George Jackson, Richard Wright, and others. Luther, unlike his brother, didn't smoke or drink, and he always be doing odd jobs to get money. Even the closest friend, Clyde and T-Bone, didn't fully understand him. While they be partying all weekend, Luther be traveling. He'd be taking his little money with a bag full of food, mainly fruit, and a change of underwear, and get on the Greyhound bus and go. He said he'd be visiting cities. Yet the real funny thing about Luther was his ideas. He was always talking about Africa and Black people. He was into that Black stuff. And he was as light-skinned as a piece of golden corn on a cob. He'd be calling himself Black and African and upset everybody, especially white people. He'd be calling him crazy, but not to his face. Anyway, the family, mainly the educated side, just left him alone. They just be polite to him. And every child of God knows that when family members act polite, that means they don't want to be around you. It didn't matter much because after his mother died, he left the city and went into the army. The last time we heard from him was in 1963. He got put out the army for rioting. He disappeared somewhere between Mississippi and Chicago. The third cousin, whose family was also polite to, appeared one day and said that Luther had grown a beard, changed his name, and stopped eating meat. She said he had been to Africa and now lived in Chicago doing what he wanted to do, writing books. She also said that he smiles a lot and kind of got good teeth. I'm going to kind of end up here. I know I'm probably going on a little bit too long, but I have to read this last poem, which is Rape, the Male Crime. And I'm reading this poem primarily what's happening in Texas in terms of trying to wipe out Roe and rape, the male crime. There are mobs and strangers in us who scream of the women wanted and will get, as if the women are ours for the taking. Our mothers, sisters, wives, and daughters cease to be the women men want. We think of them as loving family, music and soul, bright wonderments. They're not locker room talk, not the hunted lust or dirty cunt burning holes. Bright wonderments are excluded by association as blood and heart, bone and memory, and we will destroy rapist kneecaps and write early grave on his thoughts to protect them. It will do us large to recall when the animal in us rises that all women are someone's mother, sister, wife, or daughter, and are not fruit to be stolen when hungry. Rape is not a reward for warriors. It is war itself, a deep, deep tearing, a dislocating of the core of the woman's self. Rape rips heartlessly soul from spirit, obliterating colors from beauty and body, replacing melody and music with rat vermin noise and uninterrupted intrusion and beatings. A significant few of their fathers, brothers, husbands, sons, and growing strangers are willing to unleash harm on the earth and spill blood in the eye of maggots in running shoes who do not know the sounds of birth or respect the privacy of the human form. No means no. Even when men think that they are God's gift to women, even after dropping a week's check and more on dinner by the ocean, the Four Tops, Temptation, and Intruder's Memory Tour, imported wine and roses that capture her smile, suggested to you private music and low lights, drowning out her unarticulated doubts. Questioning or question the 1,000 years teachings, crawling through your lower depth, and don't let your little head outthink your big head. No means no, even when her signals suggest yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Haki. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Took me backwards and forwards and sideways with those poems. I have some questions, but I want to start with one that's in the chat, which ties to one of the first questions I was going to ask. And one of the questions were, you talked a little bit about some of the authors who had the most impact on you. And so I'm going to back into some of that because that's one of the things that people want to know, but I want to frame it a little bit. But the first question is there anything that you would say to young authors and poets who are daunted to put their work out there?
Oh, yes. Wait. There are 4 things I think needs to be done before we publish. 1, study. Read as much as you can, especially in the genre in which you wish to work. So reading is critical. 2 is writing every day. Walk with your notebook. I guess most people now, young people, either write on their phones or iPads or computers, but I always carry a pencil, a pen, and a notebook. The 3rd is to workshop. You need to get other writers. You need to have other people in your life who have some critical ability to look at your work as well as their own work and say, well, this really needs some work done on it. And then the 4th thing is revision. Most of us, especially young writers, feel that the first thing they write, especially young rappers, feel the first thing they write, that's it. I got it. No, that's not it. And I would strongly suggest education as much as possible. And I didn't get my first degree until, well, it was late. But the point is that if you can get an undergraduate degree, that would be great. Okay. But I wouldn't go into this kind of serious debt that we have to go into today to get an undergraduate degree. So I'm saying take your time, because often the first poems or the first essays or the first fiction piece, short stories and stuff, needs a lot of work done on it. And to get with people that know something about writing, about literature.
Okay, I like that. That's a great segue. So talking about getting with people who know something about writing. Could you talk a little bit about the Obasi Writers Group and how those workshops function? And then talk a little bit more, if you could, about ways in which, so talk about what you all did, and then if you could also talk about the ways that young people can innovatively function in writing collectives similar to what you all did.
The Obasi Writers Workshop, and Obasi stands for Organization of Black American Culture. And the Writers Workshop was founded by myself, and mainly led by Hort W. Fuller, and other writers at that time was Carolyn Rogers, Sterling Plump, and others who were in the workshop. And we met weekly, and we taxed ourselves because we had a space we had to pay for. So we taxed ourselves, and we kept that space alive. And when writers came in who had made a name for themselves, we would pick them up at the airport and bring them to our space so they can talk to us. So Obasi was critical in terms of my own maturation. And I was not only a part of the Obasi Writers Workshop, I was also part of the Gwendolyn Brooks Writers Workshop. Because Gwendolyn Brooks, after she finished up her work with the Blackstone Rangers, she started her own workshop in her home, and we met weekly. So I was meeting weekly in two workshops, one with Gwendolyn Brooks and one with Hort W. Fuller. Many of your students may not know who Hort W. Fuller was or is, but he's deceased now. But he was the managing editor of one of the major magazines, monthlies that come out of the Black Arts Movement, which was Negro Digest, which became Black World Magazine. And Black World Magazine was just as important as, say, for instance, the Crisis magazine edited by W.B. Du Bois, for those of you who have some understanding about history. And Hort Fuller gave his life for us. I mean, but we had these mentors, Gwendolyn Brooks, Hort Fuller, Dudley Randall, who founded the Broadside Press in Detroit, Michigan, he mentored me. That's how I started Third World Press, by looking at Broadside Press and looking at what Margaret Burroughs was doing with the DuSable Museum. So having these elders around us, and when I say elders, I mean, Hort Fuller had me about 10 years. Dudley Randall, maybe a little bit more. But Gwendolyn Brooks had me about 25 years. I mean, she was really my elder. So it is critical to be with other writers. And what we would do, we would take Gwendolyn Brooks. I would take Gwendolyn Brooks into bars and taverns and just make an announcement. We're here to read some poetry. And corner bars and taverns. And the brothers and with few sisters that were there, they would put their drinks down and listen, okay? And of course, Obasi created the very important Wall of Respect, which was one of the first murals of Black culture that appeared in Chicago and over on a wall of side of a bar, okay? And we were serious as a first love. I'm still serious as a first love. How do we, and the interesting thing about what we are today is that what we're fighting for today, that's what we fought for in the 60s. That's what our foreparents fought for when they first arrived and moved up through the Reconstruction, through the Black codes and segregation and Jim Crow and Jane Crow. The reason I say Jane Crow is because you can't have Jim Crow without Jane Crow. You got to have a mama, right? So you got Jim Crow and Jane Crow. We moved up through that and fought our way into where we are today, but we're still fighting for the same things. And this is why I have so much respect for the two writers I listed earlier in terms of white culture, Tom Hartman and Amy Goodman. And I guess you all saw Frances Hogan today giving testimony around Facebook. That's a brave woman, okay? Because she's coming up against $1 trillion company, and they don't play, okay? So young people, it's on you. I cannot say it enough. And my wife and I, we have children. And they're all university graduates, and they're doing social, cultural work, and it's important.
So Haki, it's funny. I swear I'm not lying. I literally have as a question, two people that you mentioned. Of course, I'm cheating because I know this, right? But I'm going to do something here. I'm going to push you. I would like you to talk a little bit about Gwen Brooks's enduring impact on your craft as a poet. So I'd like you to describe the technical, aesthetic, and other aspects of that influence, because Gwen's form and style was a little different from what you guys were doing in the 60s and 70s, right? And then if you can do the same thing, talk about Hoyt's impact on, really technical, get nitty and gritty with me. And then after you talk about that, Haki, so hit that, but then after you hit that, I've never heard you just talk about your actual process as a writer. Like, here's what I do. I get up, or when I'm really getting into a work, or, how do you go about that? Now, I've seen you just bang something out by hand real fast, and I'm like, he fooling me, but maybe that's, you just, a good friend of mine, Haki Bakari, was like, man, sometimes Haki, he just, back in the day, he could just write it and we put it right back in. Okay, I'm going too far, but talk about Gwen and Hoyt, really technical aesthetics, in comparison to, you were doing one thing, but they certainly impacted you, and then, like I said, and then talk about your real, if you could get a little, your personal approach to the writing of the book. Give some secrets here, Haki. Give some secrets.
Well, Gwendolyn Brooks was a secret of the formal forms of European poetry. I mean, she was especially a master of the sonnet, but she essentially did not teach us that. She emphasized reading, and then we would talk about the poems we've read and the literature that we've read and so forth. And when we would read our poems, very seldom would she criticize them. Very seldom. And I would get more criticism from other people in the workshop than from Gwendolyn Brooks. And I remember one evening just getting very perturbed about the critic having beaten me up about my poetry. And I got up and walked out. And I said, I'm gone. I'm not, I'm gonna come out of this. And Gwen got so upset about my leaving like that. We hooked up a week later on the phone, and came back together. And she said, you're a fine poet. Don't let them discourage you. You just got to keep on going. And that's when I said, okay, I got this. And that was before my third book came out, which was Don't Cry Scream, where she wrote the introduction to. And my second book, Black Pride, Dudley Randall wrote the introduction to. So I'm saying, when I need these two fine poets write the introduction to my books, I said, okay, I must have something. And Dudley Randall writes in this book to Sonia Sanchez and Smithhurst and John Bracey edited on the Black Arts Movement. Dudley Randall has an essay, and they said that Donnell Lee, that was who I was, his first three books, without any kind of advertisement, other than his reading and selling them on the streets, they sold 55,000 copies. These three books. And then when, as you know, in 1969, Ebony did this big piece on me. And when that piece hit, the book sold over 175,000 copies, all my books. And that's when I decided that I needed to leave Donnell Lee and become Haki Madhubuti. I had become too popular. So Hort Fuller, who was one of the major mentors, was one of the first Black intellectuals I met, Black male intellectuals I met, who essentially had traveled around much of the world, had been to Africa many times. And he influenced me greatly. And of course, he was one of the first to publish me in Negro Digest Black World and gave me a national audience.
What would be something, Haki, that if you think about as a poet, that Hoyt had a lasting impact on the craft, technical, or, something along those lines?
Well, Hoyt was not a poet. He's a prose master. And so generally, if I didn't publish poetry in the magazine, I was publishing book reviews or essays. And he was just a stickler for language and a stickler for grammar, and language. As was Gwendolyn Brooks. Language was her thing, you see. And that's what she would always say, well, do you think you can find another word for this? And of course, I very seldom at that time use a thesaurus. And once I got past them, I got to begin to use thesauruses and dictionaries at another level. But I think that at one point, see, craft comes about as a result of writing and reading. Okay, you can read poetry And it's almost like osmosis. You read a good poem and say, oh, I got that. And then you try to translate it in your own words to do something else what you're trying to do yourself. And I've never had a writer's block. Okay. And I think that the reason I have not had, I read widely out of my tradition, everything. And I pick up ideas everywhere. Okay. And like I said, I travel and I, walk with a pen and paper. If I hear something, I'll steal it. I'll just write it down and say, okay, I'll use it someplace else. Okay. And musicians do that all the time. And I grew up as a fledgling musician. I used to be a trumpet player. Okay. And learning how to read and write and to play music, you're always stealing from somebody. Damn, that's a good lick. Okay. So I picked it up in terms of writing and reading.
See, man, I'm telling you, we got a nice connection here because I want you to talk a little bit about jazz pacing in your poetry, especially your early work, because I think I know your language is like an instrument, right? A trumpet, and some of the poems, how you use alliteration. So discuss the alternative strategies that are imbued with jazz improvisation and experimentation in your early work, and where it fits into what you are doing now, if at all,
If it's still there, I don't use it as much as I did when I was coming up because we were surrounded so much by music. I mean, live music, okay, not records or CDs or what the case may be. And we knew the musicians, okay. And I haven't been trained as a musician trumpet player. I had a different ear. I'm listening to it differently. And so the early days, I used to play in bars and taverns with musicians, in Chicago. In fact, that's how I met David Lorenz. This is the man who wrote the article that appeared in Ebony. That's how I met him, reading a poem. And I read a poem in the last, I'll never forget, the last 3 lines of the poem reads, Jesus saves, Jesus saves, Jesus saves S&H green stamps. And you can hear the whole crowd they just burst up laughing. He fell off the bar stool, okay? And he came over to introduce himself and we became very good friends. But the point I'm trying to make is that the oldest art forms are basically music and poetry, okay? And so this music and poetry has always stayed with me. And so down here in our library, I got music all the time, 24/7. And Don't Cry Scream, that book, the title poem is about John Coltrane. That's the title poem. And they're reissuing, was it My Funny Valentine? No, they're reissuing a new piece by John Coltrane. Oh, Love Supreme, I think it is. And they asked me, could they use a piece from my poem, which of course I gave them permission to do that. But the music is critical in terms of our work. And of course, one of the major poets to be influenced by the music was Amiri Baraka. Mm-hmm. He was a master at it. And Sonia too, Sonia Sanchez. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, I think you all really understood the importance of your voice as an instrument, right? Mm-hmm. And how you can use your words to mimic these sounds. And, there was this real transference between the visual artists and musicians. It was really wonderful kind of interconnection. Okay, so I want to shift the pacing a little bit because the last few poems were Black men and taught by women. And so I want you to talk a little bit about your work that, I know your work not only focuses on the muted lives of Black men, but Black women as well. How are you able to balance making men and women's labors and struggles visible and more audible in your work? And why do you do this?
Well, Black Men, Obviously Single Danish took about 12 years to write. And I was writing that in between poetry, in between other works I was dealing with. And it was so close to me because being a Black man, have gone through all the trials and tribulations of trying to stay alive and so forth, especially in Chicago. And that's one of the reasons I think the book took so long. But also women, Margaret Burroughs and Gwendolyn Brooks and Barbara Ann Sizemore, and I can name others, these women, their work, whether you're talking about Alice Walker or Toni Morrison or Sonia or Gail Jones, it doesn't matter. They're just superior writers. And I've never feared women, okay? And nor have I seen women as competition. And I think that's one of the problems with a lot of men. They're actually afraid of women, okay? And I've always, and most certainly, have been taught for over 43 years in the academy, have seen women as partners in terms of how do I get to be a better person, better teacher, better father, better husband, and so forth. And reading all these women writers, that's why the cover of Taught by Women is just basically women writers and non-writers and different professions on the back and forth and so forth. I don't think that we can be whole people without each other. I just don't see it. And my wife and I, we've been together since, we started dating in 1968 and we married in 1974. And my life has been very, very full with her. And of course, like I say, my wife is brilliant, and that's true. And so she has a life of her own as well as I, and there's never been any competition. I can't compete with her anyway, but the point is.
I say amen to that. I have my own.
Yeah, I know you, but I'm just saying that when my wife is in education, she's an educator. So we never argue, but we might debate about something. And so for the first 15 minutes, I got it. You can't beat me. I'm a poet. I got the first 15 minutes. But after 15, 20 minutes, she started using endnotes and footnotes and pulling essays out of her mind and all this other stuff. And so I just sit down and listen.
Okay, Haki, I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna switch up a little more again. A little, it's a little more again, right? Okay, so check this out. You've already given us, one of the people writing in asked, about advice. So that was really great. But one of my questions is, what does the 79-year-old Haki Madhubuti advise the 27-year-old Don Lee, the poet? Hold up, pause, hit us with it. What is it?
Well, I think that you really got to listen to your own heartbeat at one level. Get involved in struggle. Come through Washington State University with all A's. I've never bought into, I got to struggle, so I can't read, I can't study. If you're in a university, you need to come out at the top of your class. One. Number two, you need to take care of your body. I'm a vegan. I've been a vegan for about 45 years. And if it runs from me, I'm not going to eat it. It can't get cooked, that's for sure. And so I would say nutrition is very important. In fact, today, Diet for a Small Planet, 50th anniversary was published today. Okay. And Diet for a Small Planet was one of the books that influenced me 50 years ago. So the new edition, the 50th anniversary edition came out today. I haven't got it yet, but I'm gonna pick it up. So my nutrition is plant centered. So it's plant centered, I mean it's planet centered, so it's very important that we are involved with serious work around actually climate destruction. And so I think that as you write, which gives you something to write about at one level. And so I think that we have to be involved in struggle, social struggle, struggle that deals with the lives of all people. All right. And you can't go wrong. And find a family at the university that you can relate to. You have biological family, you have a cultural family. You see. And that's why you go to university. It's a ritual at one level into adulthood. But you got to find good people, and do not spend 24 hours on a damn computer or iPad or telephone. I think that's damaging. And in fact, with the testimony today from Frances Hogan, it shows how these Facebook has basically been derelict and destructive in terms of the development of young people in this country, especially young girls. You know, so it's important that I, as a 79-year-old writer, well, man, writer, and so forth, tell young people, do not give up on your dreams, you know, but be around people that got some damn sense. You see, get very careful. I mean, I never drank, I never smoked, spent 3 years in the military, but I was always serious. And sometimes people say too serious. You're too damn serious, you know. I remember writers, I actually going into some sets and writers actually hiding their drinks and whatever they're smoking. So here come Don Lee, you know. So, but anyway, that's me. And I don't have any elements at all. You know, I'm at 79 years old. And that's because and so you say, what do I do? I get up.
Well, I say, what would you,
really around
what is it?
5 a.m.
But I would say, what does the Haki now tell the Don Lee of 27? You did right, or I mean, what would you tell if you had a chance to say something to him? What would you say to him as a poet?
I don't know. Well, what I would say, don't go into the military. I spent 3 years in the Army. Okay, but I had no option. Now you have all kind of options. And with Biden and his administration saying the first 2 years of community college is free, that's all you need. You can go to community college and get all A's in the first 2 years. You get a free ride for the next 2 years. Okay. Education is so key. And that's why we made sure that our children, our biological children, and all these cultural children we got are able to come out of these universities and not be totally in debt, you know, which is criminal. The student debt in this country is over $1.6 trillion. It's actually criminal, and they should wipe that debt out. And if they wipe that debt out, you'll see an explosion of creativity in all the different areas, because it's oppressive now. These young people can't get anything done by trying to pay this debt.
Hey, so Haki, of course, you just demonstrate. I'm just picking up the threads here of things that, like you demonstrated your humor, right? Or you say, hey, just don't go. I wouldn't go to the military. But and that takes me to, I really like the sort of ironic and sarcastic humor in your poetry, and I feel it's really in the trickster signified tradition. So people who don't know, you don't realize, they see this calm, serious guy, but I've had an opportunity to see this really funny person, and people have, even here tonight, have had an opportunity to see and witness the wit. And so, how do you always seem to take on really serious topics, and yet constantly peppering humor, real, with the slower mind may not get it, but it's just constant, and so is that something you're conscious of, or does it just happen, or is it just a manifestation of your personality? Talk about that.
It's probably a combination of all of that. I grew up signifying, and being 6'1", 149, 49 to 50 pounds, I couldn't fight my way out of a damn paper bag. And so, but I could talk about your mama, you know what I'm saying? And that I could talk about you in terms of what you look like and so forth. And so signifying, we grew up with it in terms of playing the dozens and so forth. And that's how I got through high school without being beat up so badly half the time. And maybe at one level why I went into the military, to learn how to fight and so forth. But so this humor is what makes us whole. If you can't laugh and you can't smile, especially laugh at yourself and smile with other brothers and sisters. And one of the beautiful things about having men, I do these men's workshops, is that we have this humor, that we're able to share at another level. And you'll be able to break the ice, or to break the code, whatever the case may be. So humor is very important. And I saw it with musicians all the time, especially if somebody messes up with their music, and even see it to a large extent with athletes, especially basketball players. You know, if somebody dunk on you, you can never live it down. You know, so this humor is critical in terms of the wholeness of any people, I think.
Haki, we have another question. Thank you for that. I love that. You know, humor is it keeps us alive. Well, we have a question in the chat that they asked, what advice do you have to get out of our heads, our worlds, real and virtual, in terms of our writing? What's your advice for how we get out of our heads, our worlds, the real and the virtual, in terms of our writing?
I read every day. And I turn this phone off at 9 p.m. and I turn it on at 9 a.m. All right. So I'm not dealing with virtual nothing for the most part. And I'm using my wife's computer now because my iPad didn't work with the connection here. I'm old school, but old school who understands new school to a large extent. We're living in social media that we can't go back to where I came from. You got to take what you have today, reorientate it, and make it work for you. The key point is, do not let the social media control you. And I think that the hearings that are going on in Congress today are about the controls that social media, especially Facebook, I imagine Instagram and all of them have on the young people. The same type of control that say if you used to smoke, you couldn't get away from cigarettes because they would contaminate the cigarettes with things that would draw you in to keep you smoking. That's the same thing that happened with social media. All right. And this is why I'm saying, if you want to cure ignorance, read books. If you want to deal with ugly, read books. I mean, and what that does, it puts you in a better frame of mind where you can deal with ugly and to deal with, angry and deal with that which is not in the best interest of humanity. And so my life revolves around doing that which is good, just, correct, and right with a sense of integrity, with the understanding of history, and basically not giving in to the newness of anything. You see, just because it's new, it does not mean that it's something that one needs to be involved in. And be very careful. Learn how to say no. Learn how to say no. All too often, we try to be popular and we end up saying yes when you shouldn't be saying yes, especially women dealing with these Neanderthals out here. So, so my day, we were talking about earlier, starts at about 5 o'clock in the morning. I'll get up and I do yoga and I read. I drink at least 2 large glasses of water. And then I have a green drink that I drink. And then I'll just come down and do my yoga and exercise and stuff, get that out of the way, and then start my day. I go into the office now only 1 day a week, but I'm writing. I'm trying to finish this second part of my memoir. I'm writing a book. Bakari and I writing a book together, autobiography of a black vegan, and that's it. I'm writing and reading all day. Or if I'm working, I don't travel that much now because of COVID-19, and I have my shots. And I would definitely do not listen to the internet, nothing around COVID. You see, go to your doctors, okay? And that's it. And I did not want to get shots. Being a vegan, I felt I could kind of swim through this, but my sons and both of them say, well, you're not going to see your grandchildren. That's all. That did it right there. So I got my shots, and I had basically pulled together cocktails that I could take that I thought would neutralize whatever pushback that we would receive from the shots, but I didn't have any at all. I didn't even get tired, So that's it. And Now, I have in my library right down here, I have a full gym. I got treadmill, I got weights, I got a stationary bike, I got a stair climber, I got rowing machine, I got everything down here. And so I don't even have to go out and go to these gyms. I got one right here. And that's what my wife and I worked for all of our lives to, because we, I grew up around Pimps and Hoes slamming Cadillac doors on the west side of Chicago and lower east side Detroit, Michigan. And you're poor when you're wearing used underwear. That's how poor I was. And but you don't forget that. I don't forget it at all.
Well, Haki, this conversation has been unforgettable. I appreciate you taking the time to share with our students your journey, the craft of writing, the insights around finding their own voice and sense of self, and we all find our way through people who have successfully done these things because it inspires us to understand that we can. And so we thank you so much for this wonderful evening of insights and conversations. And I love your poetry. I really do. And I hope that everyone here this evening has had an opportunity to have the same wonderful experience. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank you for initiating this invite. And I'm really happy to be with
Pavitra gets some of the credit.
Whomever. But the key point is that the world, it's your world. And you got to take it. You got to take it from these criminals and people who do not care for each other at all. So thank you very much. I'm really happy to have been with you this evening. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right.